All right, welcome back to the Founder-Led Marketing Show. Today I have Cobi Blumenfeld-Gantz, who is the co-founder and CEO at Chapter. Chapter is a technology-driven Medicare advisor that's improving how seniors choose their health coverage. They raised a Series B in 2022, are beyond the 10 million ARR or run rate stage, and today we're going to dive into how they got the first customers, how they're going to market, what's working for them, and any lessons and mistakes there. Thank you, Cobi, for joining me.
Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
How would you, maybe from your perspective, in 2 or 3 sentences, one, how would you describe what Chapter is? Maybe that one line is good enough. Maybe you have a more nuanced explanation. And then 2, why did you start this company?
We're a technology-enabled Medicare navigation platform. So when Americans turn 65 or retire, they need to deal with Medicare in some way. And unlike choosing health insurance through your employer, when you sign up for Medicare, you usually have anywhere from 50 to 200 options to choose from, and you don't have an HR department or a company to help you navigate that choice. And so we pair you with a licensed Medicare advisor who has access to our tech platform that we've built from the ground up with best-in-class data to enable people to find the plan that meets their needs at the lowest possible price. That's kind of the core of what we do. There's a lot of bad actors and a lot of misaligned incentives in this industry. And so another part of what we've done is try to take an industry that is antiquated and really isn't set up to serve consumers. It's more set up to serve insurance carriers and flip it on its head. And there's a lot of nuance I can walk through in that. But at a high level, we're trying to make sure consumers get the right plan rather than getting screwed by the industry.
That's awesome. Why did you start this company?
I saw my parents dealing with Medicare when they were going through the process. They ended up working with a local Medicare broker who was well-intentioned, but did not have the data or the tools or the knowledge to serve them well. One of the things I didn't know before starting this company is that if you sign up for Medicare at the wrong time, the government imposes lifetime penalties, which are basically an additional tax for not signing up when you're supposed to. And my parents missed their deadlines, ended up having lifetime penalties on top of their Medicare premiums. And it also took them 3 months and many, many calls back and forth with Social Security office and their Medicare advisor and their insurance carrier. And it was just a terrible experience. And I looked at that and thought that we could do a much better job, and we deserve it to our elders to do a much better job to set them up for this chapter of their lives.
I'm curious, what made you feel like, and this is not me trying to firing shot, what made you feel like you were qualified to start this business? Because, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, looking at your LinkedIn, it looks like your background is not in insurance, Medicare, healthcare. It's in business development and operations, finance. So I'm curious, how did you decide, okay, this is an opportunity I should pursue and I can actually do it?
Before Chapter, I was at Palantir for quite a while, doing a lot of U.S. government work, building data systems for the U.S. government. And a bunch of the things I learned there were around how large organizations deal with data, how you can make data more accessible and more usable. And when I started looking into Medicare, it became clear that it's really, in large part, a data problem. It's a lot of siloed data from a lot of different sources, and no one takes a data-driven approach to the market. Into the consumer experience. And so from that perspective, I felt pretty qualified to deal with the data challenges. Now, of course, I don't have a healthcare background. I don't have a Medicare background before starting the company. But we didn't even intend to start a Medicare company. My initial goal was to start a company that helps older individuals navigate the transition into retirement. And that's still our goal, with Medicare being the very first piece of that puzzle. The reason we started with Medicare was because of seeing my parents' experiences and just talking to people about what they were worried about in retirement. And Medicare was always the number 1 or number 2 thing people talked about and people had anxiety about. So we really focused on that as our first sort of product line. But my broad philosophy is you don't really need to come from an industry to build in that industry. There are trade-offs, certainly. There are advantages to knowing things faster that I would have known if I had come from the industry, but there are also a lot of advantages coming from a different industry where I don't have a lot of preconceived notions. When I started Chapter, I would tell people what we were planning to do, and most people I talked to who are in the Medicare industry told me it was either illegal or impossible. And I heard that from literally dozens of people. Like 90% of people I talked to said it's not possible, or it's illegal, or both. If I had listened to them or come from the industry, I may have agreed with that, and Chapter might not exist.
That's awesome. Do you consider Chapter fundamentally a software business, an insurance business, or a professional services business because you have advisor advising people?
I don't like to be put in a box, so it's a little hard to say. But I'd say we're somewhere between. I mean, we're a technology company in that we build technology. We build technology both for our internal team and for consumers. We hire the best engineers and product individuals in New York and hopefully in the world. I took some of the best engineers I worked with at Palantir and brought them over. We do employ humans to do things, but so do software companies and SaaS companies. I think there's this common misconception that if you're a SaaS company, somehow like you don't have humans do things, but you do. And it's just sort of where they're focusing their time. So I would say we operate in the insurance industry, in the Medicare industry today. We build technology and we make sure we have really strong customer support and a really strong consumer experience, which is partially enabled by humans.
I guess where investors would look, and I mean, I'm sure you've had that conversation because you raised seed A and B round, is at the gross margin that, a software business should be, I don't know, 70, 80, 90% gross margins. And obviously professional services companies or insurance companies have very different unit economics. Does that matter to you? Do you think about it in those terms? I'm just curious. And how do investors approach it in that sense when you try to raise money from them?
Yeah, we have very strong gross margins. They look a lot more like a SaaS company than not. But what I'm seeing, and I think what's becoming a lot more obvious to investors, is that companies that solve real world problems do require humans sometimes, at least for part of it. If you're solving a meaty infrastructure or antiquated industry problem, it requires people, at least in part. And that was out of vogue for, I think, the 2010s. And it is very much becoming in vogue to realize that companies need to solve real problems, and just another like enterprise SaaS product is maybe not the most valuable thing. So I think investors are quite excited broadly about companies that are solving real problems for humans and in real spaces, both physical and digital. And for us, we've been able to create an economic profile that's quite attractive through technology, right? I agree, if we were just a professional services firm, we would have a very different unit economic profile than what we do. Though importantly, the services industry is maybe the largest industry in the U.S. So it's not that it's not small at all.
Any lessons on fundraising? I mean, you raised, what is it, over 50 million total? You started the company, I guess, in 2019, 2020. You raised a seed in 2020, Series A in 2021, and Series B in 2022. What are your biggest takeaways, lessons, maybe mistakes that you made? What would you tell other founders who are considering raising or are on that journey?
Yeah, we started the company in 2020. And it was a quick ride to a fair amount of capital. Frankly, a lot of it was luck. A lot of it was timing. I think there's a lot of lessons and tactics about, I think, how to fundraise and how to think about it. Different things work for different companies and different people. What I would say is it's really important to select investors, talk to investors who are well positioned to like your company. So there are some investors who don't invest in healthcare, or who don't invest in things that aren't enterprise SaaS, or who only invest in crypto, whatever it is. A lot of investors have themes, and different funds within firms will have themes. And I think you can waste a lot of time if you don't figure out what the right archetype of investor, both who's potentially likely to invest and who you want. Some people want a lot of hands-on support as they build their company. Some people want totally hands-off. Either is fine. I think it's just important to know what you're looking for and be upfront with the people you're talking to about what type of long-term partner you want, because if things go well, you are in a very long-term relationship with these individuals and these funds. So it's really important to think about that up front. We've been very fortunate with our investors. They've all been wonderful. But a lot of that was because we pre-selected for investors who we thought would be good archetypes of those we wanted. In terms of sort of how to get it done and how to do the raise, I think timing matters as much as anything else. So not just market, but with where you are, what metrics you need to hit as a company. And again, which investors are likely to care about those metrics and those milestones. A lot of tactics we can go through, but that's the high level.
How has your perspective changed on how to use the money that you're raising? Obviously don't open your books here, but from what people talk about, it's much harder to raise now, right? Valuation multiples are way down. Investors want to see different things. It's more about efficiency now than growth at all costs. So given that we're in this environment, have you changed your approach a little bit? Said, oh, we consider this Series B our last funding round we will ever get, and just generally speaking, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it's hard to talk in generalities, but I've seen many, both investors and founders, I think, overcorrect. It is very important to make sure you have a good business and to make sure you have good unit economics and to make sure you have a path towards sustainable growth, certainly. But it is also, I think, unhealthy and unreasonable to tell a company that's 2, 3, 4 years old that it should be profitable while it's trying to grow 2, 3, 4, 5, 6x a year. If you do that, you're going to sacrifice material growth of a company and I think likely make it fail. Now, again, there are some companies that should grow slower, some companies that should grow faster, and it really depends on the company. But I think the broad move from growth at all costs to growth at appropriate costs, I think, is good. That's healthy for everyone. It's healthy for businesses. It's healthy for consumers because consumers generally have a better experience when that happens. But I think there's this overcorrection that has happened over the past couple of years of people being so terrified of spending money and of growing that it can scare people out of doing actually what's right for the company and be more myopic than they should be. So for us and for me, I think it's more about having either strong unit economics or a path to strong unit economics while you grow, rather than saying, we have this fixed cost base of humans, which has been building our technology, and we have to make sure all of our revenue covers that today, which I just don't think makes any sense. And you can build a very good business slowly over time, but if you care about speed, which I do, and you want to build quickly, which I do, you have to spend some money and you have to hire great people, and that costs money.
When you say growth at reasonable cost, is there any metric you look at, or what's the healthy balance?
Yeah, I think in 2020, 2021, the metric that was in vogue was LTV to CAC. So how much money you generate from a customer and an account over time relative to how much it costs you to acquire that account. That metric somewhat matters to some investors, but the more important metric to most investors is payback period. So how long does it take you to recoup your acquisition costs? And 1 year is kind of the magic number target. The closer you can get to 1 year or below basically means you can spend $1 and make more than $1 without having to spend that capital in a 1 year time period. So again, it depends on the business. I think any investor who says this is the metric we care about across all businesses probably isn't a thoughtful investor for you, because all of it, like many businesses, have different models and different ways to create value. So it does depend on the business and the industry and the competitive nature of the products you're selling and building. But broadly, I think 1 year payback is a reasonable way to think about efficiency of unit economics.
We talked a little bit before the show, and you said you guys have a B2B2C model, meaning obviously it's individual senior people using the, who need the Medicare, but you sell through organizations. So maybe we can talk a little bit through your go-to-market and how that has evolved on the journey from, 0 to now 10 million plus. So maybe we can start at the beginning. How did you guys initially get first users and customers? And then what were kind of the iteration points that mattered along the journey of how you guys have evolved your go-to-market, and where is it right now?
Yeah, at the very beginning, it was very ad hoc and really us just trying to get some initial users to find out if we even had a product that people wanted, and if we were even better than the incumbents. And so that was, my parents were our first two members. It was their friends. It was emailing and pinging a lot of my friends to ask if their parents would talk to us and give us a shot. So a lot of probably the first 100 users, 100 customers, were just family, friends of investors, just kind of anyone we could get our hands on. I think we went out to some public libraries and just started asking around if anyone had Medicare questions. Very ad hoc, not scalable, but great way to get early signal. The feedback was tremendous. People loved it, and started referring their friends. On a small base that didn't grow quickly enough, on such a small base, we did need something more substantial. And so we looked at both ways to advertise on D2C, Facebook, Google, TV, radio, which is TV and radio in particular are pretty common in Medicare. It's a more antiquated industry where there's more analog advertising. And then we also thought about partnerships, but we're hoping that we could make the unit economics work really well on direct to consumer. Just because it's more in our control, we can turn the dials easier, and sales cycles are, of course, a lot shorter. So we did a lot of experimentation around direct to consumer. We found that it works. We were able to make it work. And on an in a world where LTV to CAC is the metric that you care about, it was pretty attractive. But on a payback period basis, it was not attractive. And so it was challenging to want to spend a ton of money there.
On that, any particular channel for the D2C that worked? Facebook ads or anything in particular that stood out?
Google and TV and radio at different points were the most effective. Facebook wasn't particularly effective at the beginning. And I think one lesson in retrospect, which I'll come back to, is that so much of our product was immature and ill-defined. So not just the ads and the creative for the ad, but also the user acquisition flow, and then also the tooling for our Medicare advisors and the routing and all the logic there, and then also all the follow-ups. So the product was just very immature at that point. And so there were a lot of variables to isolate to try to make it better. And it was really hard to know which of the 25 variables or parts in the product experience were not sufficiently optimized. So that was very challenging there. When we did TV, the response was quite good, but it was spiky and bursty, which meant that we showed a TV ad and then we had lots of people calling in at once. And again, we didn't have particularly intelligent systems to load that balance, to balance the load. We didn't have sufficient number of humans to deal with that. This was reasonable AI based customer support. And so the ability for us to capture that demand was limited. But we took a pretty hard look at the value props we were creating and the way we were sort of operating, and thought that there might be an opportunity to partner with larger organizations and kind of build on their brand and build on the trust that they've generated with their audience. And my background at Palantir and my co-founder's backgrounds, it aligned quite well with doing B2B. That's what I had done. It's what my co-founders had done. And so we started looking at financial advisors and health systems and healthcare providers primarily. And the value props resonated tremendously. And we started getting really strong feedback from these organizations who, for the large part, didn't even want to be paid. And so we moved from a world where we had quite high marketing CAC to $0 marketing CAC, which was wonderful.
That's nice.
Of course, there are trade-offs. It's a B2B sales cycle. It takes a little longer. There's more convincing you have to do that we're actually doing the right thing for consumers, that we're not charlatans like everyone else in this industry is. But once we overcame those hurdles, it was just amazing sort of channel product market fit there, where they would refer to us and their consumers had an amazing experience and it reflected well on them. And it became a consistent stream of referrals. It has become a consistent stream of referrals that's allowed us to scale quite rapidly.
Can you give me an example of this? So financial advisor, so this is a bank or an arm of a bank that has a bunch of people who do financial advising, and their incentive is just they've built this whole plan for someone for retirement, and so they want to allow their clients to just get the best possible Medicare, and that's why they were just incentivized to use you without even getting paid.
Yeah, it could be a bank, it could be a wealth management institution, it could be an insurance organization that doesn't do Medicare. But yes, at a high level, their audience, and 70 million Americans need help with Medicare. It's a constant question for people as they approach retirement. It's one of the largest expenses that people have in retirement. Healthcare expenses can be up to $300,000 or more of spend if you don't handle it correctly in retirement. And so it's a question that people ask their financial advisor, and financial advisors, A, aren't well trained in this, and B, right from a regulatory perspective, aren't allowed to go into details because they're not licensed in this area. And so they want and need a trusted resource to be a fiduciary in the same way they are in most cases to their clients. And we offer that.
So how did you build relationships with these institutions, with the banks and with the insurance providers?
At the beginning, it was asking and begging for warm intros. So one of our actually earliest and smallest, one of our smallest investors made the introduction to our one of our first financial advisor partners, and I was introduced to the CEO, had a great conversation, and then navigated the org from there. We leaned on a couple other investors for additional intros, and then once we had 2 or 3 organizations that had pretty good reputations, we were able to use that. They referred us to other people. They did marketing for us, which was wonderful, and then emails and calls worked quite well. When we said, we work with these 3 organizations, other people said, oh, they're good, so you guys must be good too. And that really started to catalyze the growth.
Interesting. And it was you doing the selling in the beginning, or even still?
Yeah. I did a lot of the early account closing and sort of because it's important for me and for any CEO to stay close to customers and close to what's going on in the business and hear the feedback from partners directly.
Can you give me an idea of the average deal size or ASP for these types of contracts?
Yeah, it can vary quite a bit. We target $500,000 to $1 million in ARR on the low side per account. Mm-hmm. The really cool thing about the way the economics of our business work is that the net dollar retention of our partnership model is just absurdly high. It can be north of 2 or 3x, which is pretty off the charts.
Wow!
And so that's because Medicare has a recurring commission stream or recurring revenue stream on a per person basis. So we enroll 100 people, we get that revenue every year that we retain those people. And then the next year, not only does the partner grow because we mutually get better at referring people and they become more comfortable with us, and the whole sort of partnership works better and better. So we get, instead of 100 people in year 1, we get maybe 200 people in year 2. And so in aggregate, that's 300 people. And so now we've gone from 100 to 300 people on an economic basis in a year. So it's been a pretty good referral stream.
So $500,000 to $1 million on the low side, you said, like ARR per. Roughly,
yeah. That's probably our target. We'll go a little lower and higher from there.
How are you thinking about, founder-led sales and you being involved in these deals? Will this kind of like for Alex Kopp just forever be the case that for the biggest accounts, you'll do the closing yourself, or is there some point at which you'll hand that off, and is this like 20% of your time or 10% or 50% of your time?
We do have a partnerships team that does the majority of this. So I don't do the majority of it anymore. But I think I will always be involved in some aspects of it. So for some accounts, I help close, not all accounts, certainly. It's probably 20 to 25% of my time today, across sourcing and trying to help the team close accounts, and navigate different organizations. Ideally, that will go down a bit as we scale, but that's about what it is today.
What's your thinking, and this is obviously the name of the show, about founder-led marketing? So founder-led sales, obviously you agree with it and you do it still. What do you think about the, founders and CEOs?
Both because it's not my background, and I'm not the most comfortable with like just talking about stuff that I feel like I don't have a ton of authority to talk about. When it comes to Medicare, I'll talk all day. I feel like I know a fair amount about Medicare, but about other stuff, it sometimes makes me uncomfortable talking about it and giving advice where I don't know if I actually know what I'm talking about. But I do think it's quite important and helpful. And what I found is as I've tried to do more sourcing and closing for Chapter, having some brand authority on platforms like LinkedIn actually matters a lot and helps a lot. And so I've gotten over my personal opposition to it and have started to do it a lot more. Hence me being on this podcast. But yeah, I do think it's quite valuable. I personally kind of only use LinkedIn. I don't use Twitter. I don't use TikTok. I don't use Instagram. I don't really use anything but LinkedIn. Probably should, but I just haven't gotten onto other platforms.
Have you found that, I'm looking at your LinkedIn, you post every now and then. You posted a week ago, you posted a month ago and 2 months ago. Have you found that, you sell into large organizations and I guess pretty senior people within them. Have you found that this helps with that? Do people say something? Do they care or not care? Any feedback you've gotten there from people?
Yeah, I think it's hard to know. Most people don't say directly, "Hey, I'm willing to talk to you because of your LinkedIn posts," but you can kind of tell when people are I think looking legitimate and looking like you know what you're talking about in a space that the partner cares about. So when we talk to healthcare providers or health systems, the fact that I post about policy in Medicare or what's wrong and right with Medicare today, I think does help because it's quite relevant. And people see that I sort of hopefully know what I'm talking about on these topics. And so they would trust us with Medicare guidance. I think posting about startup tips or how to fundraise, I think is fine. But for the partners I'm trying to sell into, I don't think they care.
Right. No, that makes total sense. And is this something you plan to build out? Is this like a thing where you just, okay, every once in a while, whenever I have a thought or, I think you did like, what is this? Like, well, you testified in front of the Senate and you had a webinar or something with Donna and Fallon and you shared that. Is this more like a whenever something is, I'll just publish it? Or is this something where you feel like?
It definitely, when there's something substantive to publish, I will certainly publish it. I have tried, and I've gone through periods. Last year in particular, I did a decent job where I would try to post either weekly or 2 to 3 times a week. And it works. Audience grows, more engagement. Certainly the algorithms support that and promote that. It's just really hard with trying to build a company and remember to do all these things. And it's just not my highest priority. But yes, if I kept it as a priority, I do think it's valuable and I would do. It just has slipped, frankly, this year as I've been trying to do everything else.
Right. No, that makes total sense. Where do you feel like now that you think about the next steps for you guys? You are already, quite successful in the terms of most startups who never make it to 1 million. Where do you feel like your priorities should go as you prepare for the next stages of growth?
For us, it's about how do we accelerate our partnership channel and make sure that we are continuing to be able to close new accounts and serve our existing accounts exceptionally well. As I alluded to date, it's been somewhat sort of driven by me and ad hoc, and we're trying to professionalize and have predictability and repeatability around that. So we've started to do a lot more systematic outreach, a lot more systematic closing, and a lot more systematic onboarding, which has been quite good.
And when you think about that, does that mean hiring a bunch of SDRs and AEs? Does that mean running a bunch of ads? How do you think about, systematizing it and scaling it?
We're experimenting on the ad side. I don't think that's going to be the most effective. It's certainly some BDRs, SDRs. My philosophy in general with the entire company is to try to keep the company as small as we can while growing as quickly as we can. And so certainly we need, some N people of doing the work, but there are lots of ways to automate and make these processes pretty efficient. I think actually the smaller team you have, the more effective it can be. You can catch issues earlier. You can coach people with more attention and train people better, and just learn a lot faster. So certainly hiring BDRs, hiring account managers, but not hiring an army of them. A very small end of each as we scale.
Talking to other founders who maybe are running right now more of a D2C approach and are thinking about, building out a partnership program, what advice would you have for them, except maybe, having enterprise sales experience and coming from a company like Palantir? Are there any key hires, key books, anything that, was really helpful for you?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is actually not to outsource it to someone else. I think the founders have to be the ones to figure it out and start doing it. And of course, reach out to your network, talk to people who are good at enterprise sales, who know stuff. I'm happy to talk to anyone. But I do think founders need to at least be a major part of figuring out the sale. They'll know the product best. They'll be able to develop the value props the best. And if you are putting the company's existence into the hands of someone else at the stage where the thing has to work or the company's dead, I think that's a pretty precarious position to be in. So yeah, I think it's really important that the founders are heavily involved, if not driving, the initial enterprise strategy. And also there's I didn't expect this coming in, but there's a level of I don't know if it's respect, but kind of mystique that even large company leadership, C-suite individuals have about with regard to founders. And they will often be willing to talk to founders, even if, you just happen to have started a company and you don't have to have a lot of credentials. I think they're more willing to talk to founders than like a head of BD or a head of sales or something. One common pitfall I see is people trying to hire someone with like 5, 10, 15, 20 years of industry experience. At Palantir, we saw this all the time and it never worked. I've never seen it work well. Like it's just not, like, I can go through all the reasons, but it's usually just not going to work.
Yeah, the whole mystique as a founder thing definitely also applies to founder-led marketing. People don't want to hear from your junior social media specialist. They want to, get the Kool-Aid straight from the founder and understand why they started this business. And have you hired a CRO, VP of sales, head of sales person already?
We have a head of BD who helps kind of across the board, not just with sales, but also not just with sort of closing accounts, but also with account management and account success. Our scope of role on our partnerships team and across the company is kind of evolving as we figure out the right way to scale it. So a little TBD how we'll set it up, but that's kind of how we thought about it to date.
Interesting. Any other priorities for you going forward, except figuring out how to build out the partnership approach?
Continuing to make our product better and better is always a top priority. So that's making sure we have consistent, high quality experience for our members, making sure people are always getting the best support. And now we're trying to sort of add on to our product, not just to provide the best Medicare enrollment experience, but also the best Medicare usage experience. So once you're on a Medicare plan, how do you get the most out of it? How do you make sure you're accessing the benefits that you've been paying for in some way or another? How do you make sure you get the healthcare you need? Find doctors who are in network, get prescriptions at the lowest cost given your plan. And there's a lot of data complexity and a lot of accessibility issues in the user experience today, broadly in the market, that we're trying to fix.
What do you feel like is the most broken things about Medicare right now in the US?
Oh man, so much broken. I think Medicare is also a broad topic. It's like the second largest U.S. government line item. So it's an $800 billion annual spend from the government's perspective. So it's a very large thing to talk about. But the part of it that we focus on is really Medicare enrollment and Medicare navigation. The most broken thing there is certainly the incentives. Every Medicare advisor, Medicare broker is incentivized to push plans that pay them more. And there's no regulatory or other responsibility or guidance for insurance brokers or Medicare brokers to do what's best for consumers. There's no fiduciary standard. There's no fiduciary expectation. And I just think that's totally messed up. So that's one of the things I was testifying in the Senate about. It's one of the things we've been advocating for since day one. And we hold ourselves to that bar, that we will always be a fiduciary to the patient or the consumer. Another area that's received a lot of attention the past few months, less on the Medicare enrollment side, but more on the insurance carrier side, is authorization denials and pre-authorization denials. So carriers will deny basically paying for services that consumers expect to be paid for, and it leaves the consumer with massive out-of-pocket expenses that they just can't afford. It's a huge problem. Some of it is incompetence, in that insurance carriers they're either missing claims or they aren't appropriately matching what's called the CPT code to the right procedure and to the right costs associated. And some of it is malicious. They're just trying to save money. And it's certainly not all malicious at all, but some of it is. And some of it is just incompetence and negligence, because these are antiquated organizations that by and large, don't have great technology. And it's really hard. These things, it's not easy to manage millions and millions of humans' healthcare. This is non-trivial by any means, but our seniors do deserve better.
What do you feel like is when you think about financial institutions or insurance providers, why should they consider you guys? What are the biggest kind of benefits to them, or what's in it for them in a sense?
Yeah, it varies a little bit by channel and by organization, but for financial institutions specifically, there's no other fiduciary Medicare advisor, full stop. And so if they want to provide fiduciary guidance to their clients, then we are the only potential partner for them. The way that sort of creates real value, tangible value, we run surveys after we support people who are referred to us. And the feedback is quite astounding. Over 90% of people who work with us say not only that they had a great experience with Chapter, but that their experience with Chapter has made them more likely to refer a friend to the partner who referred us. So if a financial advisor refers us, using Chapter makes that person more likely to generate new business for the financial advisor. And that's just one of about 6 metrics we measure for value for our partner. So it's referrals, it's retention of that consumer to the partner, it's desire to be more engaged with that partner. And so there's a lot of benefits that accrue to the referring partner that we're now starting to measure and provide, which is pretty cool.
Maybe last question or last 2 questions. Any mistakes that stick out to you in the journey of building this company that you made and wish you could have avoided?
Oh, so many mistakes. Yeah, I think I'll talk about a couple. One, like, you have to be willing to fire people and fire people early. I have never regretted firing someone. I have regretted hiring people or keeping people on too long. And that's something I consistently hear from friends who have started companies as well. And it's really hard. It's emotional. It's not to be taken lightly at all, but it is important for both the company and for the person. A bad setup for the company is also probably a bad setup for the employee. And whether they realize it or not, it is best for them that they are in a place that is a better fit earlier. And so that's one huge component.
Sorry, just to double click on it, because, I would say I can relate and resonate with that. And it seems like from you saying that you struggled with that early on. Was there any particular moment or story that made you like realize it, that made that lesson like really stick, that going forward you're like, oh, like it's still hard, but thinking of this, I really need to do this?
Yeah, I mean, I think about it every time I have to think about letting someone go. And I do make the final decision on that for everyone at Chapter. I think it's important that people that I'm the one responsible for it. But yeah, I think about early teammates whom we had to let go, and think about both the impact that their being at Chapter had on the company and our users early on, the deleterious impact it had, and how even today, sometimes when it's 2 or 3 years ago, we're still cleaning up messes from that, and still have to deal with it, because it's, at a small company, there's so much everyone does that you're not going to know about, which is good, right? People are doing a lot of things, and moving quickly, but there will always be things that you just uncover later that you don't realize someone did. And sometimes it's product related, but more often than those are easier to understand and find and fix. And they're just more transparent. It's usually more cultural or process oriented, where you don't necessarily know that people are doing something in a certain way. And then when you dig in, you realize it's because, oh, this person 2 years ago set this expectation or set this thing up. It's actually had all these downstream implications that you could never have foreseen. And so one small mistake or one poor judgment decision 3 years ago just magnifies over time, unless it's addressed pretty early. So yeah, I think about those situations a lot. And it's in particular hard because people who haven't been in that position, so other people at the company, it can be hard for them to understand the impact of what seem like small mistakes or seem like people who may or may not be a good fit for the company. And it can seem harsh from the team. If I say, hey, this person's not a good fit, we should let them go, it can seem harsh, but it's because I have a longer term view and more experience looking at how this is going to turn out. And after enough reps of this, I feel pretty confident that I can kind of it's like watching the train crash in slow motion. Like you can kind of see it happening. And I think even when people don't like to hear it, and again, it's hard, I don't take it lightly, it is far better for everyone involved to handle those situations earlier rather than later, while of course giving people feedback, of course giving them opportunities to improve. And we have seen that when we provide feedback, constructive, early and often, there are people who rise to the occasion, who shift their orientation and excel. And it's important to give people those opportunities. The hardest part by far is when someone's been struggling for a while, they haven't received feedback, and then you're in a frustrating spot where they don't know they're not doing well. Sort of the manager or the company thinks they're not doing well. And then you kind of have to start a new timeline of, okay, now we have to give this person feedback, give them time to respond. And it's just so much more overhead, but it's also the only fair thing to do in most cases. So we've moved to a model where we ensure we give feedback early and often, not just constructive, but also positive, to make sure people feel good about what they're doing.
One or two other big mistakes that you wish you could have avoided?
I mean, sort of the other side of firing is, I think the way we approached hiring upfront, I think, wasn't quite right. Not that it's necessarily right today, but it's just a lot of time wasted. I mean, hiring is one of the most important things I think founders do early on and continue to do. But and so it's a big part of what I have spent my time on. It's very easy to fall into the trap of work with a bunch of contingency recruiters, use processes that just already kind of exist, look at resumes that are fancy. I've hired, I think, 1 to 2 people from recruiters, neither of whom is still here, but of external contingency recruiters. They just don't work at the early stage. Like, they just don't. And it took me a long time, much longer than it needed to learn that lesson. Maybe it can work for some people and for some companies, but for me and for us, it just did not. And I still get 5 pings a day from recruiting agencies saying they can help, but it's just a waste of time. And it's so enticing because it's such a hard problem to solve. Like you want it to work, but it just doesn't.
It's like outsourcing product market fit.
Exactly. It's analogous to that. Yeah. I think the third is, it's really hard to be involved in everything as a CEO, a founder CEO, and you shouldn't do everything. Certainly, you need to empower the team to do things, but early on, it is actually pretty important that the CEO is at least reviewing and aware of everything. There were some things which I was probably too far from at the earliest stages, which again came back to bite us in the butt as we scaled. That I think had I been closer to early on would have seen and prevented. But of course, that trades off with other things I was spending my time on. But figuring out the right altitude with which to engage in the different problem sets at the very earliest stages, I think is probably the hardest thing to do and one of the most important things to do that I definitely didn't get perfect as we were building.
Yeah, awesome. Well, Cobi, thank you so much for your time. We'll link your LinkedIn and your company in the show notes. So if people found this valuable and interesting, you can check them out there. And I'm sure there were a bunch of nuggets in here for other founders and people trying to build a company who are not quite where you guys are. So thank you so much for your time, man.
Thanks for having me.